On March 15th, in the year 44 BC, at the base of the Curia in the theater of Pompeii, the legendary Gaius Julius Caesar, dictator of Rome, was assassinated by a group of senators. In the months leading up to the assassination, Caesar and the Senate were involved in a good old-fashioned power struggle. In an effort to appease Caesar, the Senate named him dictator for life, and ancient historians say that a sizable portion of the public wanted him to be an actual king. Caesar had been warned by numerous acquaintances to beware the Ides of March. Maybe he should have listened. Today we're going to take a look at the Romans who helped kill Julius Caesar. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what famous historical events you would like to hear about. Okay, don't have a seizure. We're gonna talk about Caesar. The most famous of the assassins was Marcus Junius Brutus, whose name was immortalized in the quote, "Et tu, Brute?", which translates to, "And you too, Brutus." If you're impressed by how eloquent Caesar was while being repeatedly stabbed to death, don't be. These words were actually written by William Shakespeare. For the record, two different ancient historians, Plutarch and Suetonius, both report that Caesar said nothing as he died. As far as anyone can tell, his last words, delivered in Latin at the beginning of the attack, were, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" Shakespeare did have a source, though. He was rephrasing something he found in an ancient account which reported a rumor that Caesar's last words were, "Kai su teknon," or "You too, my child." Some have taken this to indicate that Brutus was Caesar's biological son. This would make sense since Brutus's mother, Servilia, was in fact Caesar's mistress. However, historians maintain that teknon was merely a term of endearment and wasn't meant to be understood literally. Brutus was actually one of Caesar's protégés who came from a family that was strongly anti-tyrant. This alone could explain his involvement in the conspiracy, but it's also possible he resented Caesar for making his great-nephew, Octavian, his adopted son and heir. After Caesar was gone, Brutus and his ally Cassius found themselves at odds with Octavian and his ally Mark Antony. Brutus ultimately wound up fleeing to Greece, where he spent some time listening to philosophical lectures, building an army, and minting his own coins. The final conflict with Octavian and Antony came in 42 BC at Philippi. Brutus and Cassius lost. In the wake of defeat, Brutus took his own life by impaling himself on a sword. Once a supporter of Pompey, Cassius eventually grew to favor Caesar instead. Over time, though, he became concerned by Caesar's accumulation of power and dictatorial behavior. That wasn't his only problem with Caesar, though. Cassius had his own eye on the highest office in Rome.
"Pardon, Caesar, Caesar, pardon. As low as to thy foot doth Cassius fall,"
and felt slighted that Caesar didn't give him a military command in the war with the Parthians. Caesar also took possession of some valuable lions that Cassius was planning to bring to Rome for his sponsored games. As if all that wasn't enough, there are also suggestions Caesar might have had an affair with Cassius's wife, Tertia. Maybe that's why Cassius stabbed Caesar right in the noggin during the attack. Cassius was defeated at Philippi along with Brutus. History records that when he saw Brutus's forces overcome, he had himself decapitated by a nearby freeman. Brutus took it hard. He called Cassius the last of the Romans and had him buried on the island of Thasos before returning to the battle and meeting his own fate. In Shakespeare, when Caesar says, "Et tu, Brute?", it's clear who he's talking to. But in real life, it might not have been. There were actually two Brutuses. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, however, is the decidedly less famous Brutus. He was Caesar's right-hand man during the conquest of Gaul and had become something like a little brother to the dictator. Despite this, he was one of the masterminds behind the plot. Why did Decimus turn against his friend? It's believed that Decimus didn't feel aptly rewarded for his loyalty. The last straw might have been when Caesar indicated he was going to make Octavian, rather than Decimus, his heir. As Caesar's trusted friend, Decimus was by his side 24/7. This allowed him to provide the conspirators with insight into the dictator's state of mind. It also let him manipulate Caesar to the conspirators' will. In fact, it was Decimus who convinced Caesar to ignore the warning he had received and go to the Senate house on the day of the assassination. In the wake of the attack, Decimus wound up fleeing Rome and disguising himself as a Gaul. The gall of that guy. His one-man witness relocation program didn't last long, though. Mark Antony arranged for a Gallic chieftain to lop off the head of Decimus and send him the head, which he eventually buried in Rome. Servilius Casca was the first man to stab Julius Caesar. According to the historian Appian, Servilius went for the dictator's throat, but missed and wound up getting him in the breast. Caesar managed to push him away, and according to Plutarch, this is where Caesar uttered his true last words. "Accursed Casca, what does thou?" Or more informally, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" It's at this point that Servilius Casca asked his brother for help, and the other attackers moved in on Caesar. Servilius briefly became the tribune of the people, but his success was short-lived. He would ultimately take his own life after the loss at Philippi. Servilius stabbed Caesar first, but his brother Gaius Casca was second. The writer Nicolaus of Damascus tells us that Servilius excitedly called to his brother in Greek to get in on the fun. Gaius obliged by driving his sword into Caesar's side, and it is believed that this wound was likely the one that ended Caesar. In the end, Gaius would also take his own life along with his brother after Philippi. Tribonius was, by all accounts, an ambitious man. And even though Caesar regularly rewarded him for his service, he was one of the first to join up with the conspirators. According to Appian, on the day of the assassination, Tribonius's job was to stall Mark Antony by engaging him in conversation outside the portico of the theater of Pompey. Although it is worth noting that Plutarch claims Decimus Brutus was the one who performed this task. After Caesar's demise, Tribonius managed to get himself appointed proconsul in Asia. But, like the others, he wouldn't get to enjoy the fruits of his victory long. Tribonius eventually offended a powerful ex-Caesar supporter named Dolabella by not allowing him into the city of Smyrna. Not being the kind of guy who enjoyed being told no, Dolabella had Tribonius arrested, tried for treason, and eventually murdered in his own bed. Dolabella then let his soldiers use Tribonius's head as a ball, rolling it through the streets until it was completely crushed. Well, isn't that pleasant? Cinna, whose sister was once married to Caesar, didn't participate in the actual attack. However, he was extremely dedicated to fanning the flames of unrest against his ex-brother-in-law. They were once very close, but by the day before the assassination, Cinna gave a vitriolic speech against Caesar. Once the deed had been done, the public associated Cinna with the attack. A mob ran through the city looking for him, and when they found him, they took him out. The only problem was, they got the wrong Cinna. The man the mob whacked was a poet named Helvius Cinna, while Lucius Cornelius Cinna got away and managed to live another 40 years. In 44 BCE, Caesar made Tillius Cimber the governor of Pontus and Bithynia, which should tell you something about the kind of respect Caesar had for Cimber. At the same time, Caesar stubbornly refused to issue a pardon to Cimber's exiled brother, who had been a supporter of Pompey. This refusal is likely a big part of what convinced Cimber to join the conspiracy. According to Suetonius, Cimber was the first to grab Caesar. He latched onto his toga and pulled the dictator into a position that made him easier to stab. Caesar responded by yelling out, "Why, this is violence." After the deed was done, Cimber fled back to Bithynia, from which he was apparently able to furnish some aid to Brutus and Cassius before their defeat. History does not record how or when Cimber died, although many historians believe it's likely he met his end along with the others at Philippi. There were two Brutuses, so why not two Cassiuses, right? We know that Parmenides once taunted Octavian for being the grandson of a baker and a money changer. In a letter he said, "Your mother's meal came from a vulgar bake shop of Aricia. This is a money changer from Nerulum, kneaded into shape with hands stained with filthy lucre." This is possibly the oldest recorded Mamadis in history. Having survived 13 years after the death of Caesar, Parmenides was able to make a name for himself as a writer. He wrote numerous plays, and while none have survived, the titles of two, Thyestes and Brutus, are still known today. Eventually, Parmenides became allies with Sextus Pompey, the son of Pompey the Great, a mistake that would prove to be his downfall. In 31 BC, Sextus was defeated at the Battle of Actium by Octavian. Parmenides was executed, making him the last of Caesar's assassins to be taken out. Galba served under Caesar in eastern Gaul, and Caesar blamed him for nearly losing a legion in the winter of 57 BC. It would be but the first of many conflicts Caesar would have with Galba over the years, including the loss of a consulship and a dispute over a debt. Eventually, the bad blood pushed Galba to join the conspiracy. After it was done, Galba was captured and sentenced to the afterlife. His family would live on, though, and Emperor Galba, who ruled for 7 months in 68 to 69 AD, was his descendant. Little is known of Labeo, but Plutarch records that he helped Brutus figure out who to include in the conspiracy. After Caesar was gone, Labeo served as Brutus's legate. He is most notable for the manner in which he perished. According to Appian, Labeo literally dug his own grave. Then, in accordance with Roman custom, he took his most faithful slave by the right hand and whirled him around, thus granting him freedom. Finally, he handed the newly freed man a sword and asked for him to slit his throat. As Appian wrote, his tent became his tomb. Another Decimus. This one was once an ally of Antony and fought by his side at Actium, where they were defeated by Octavian. While building Antony's fleet, Turilius had cut down parts of a grove that were thought to be sacred to the god Aesculapius. According to the writer Valerius Maximus, after Antony had lost the battle, Octavian commanded Turilius to be put down in the very grove he had desecrated. After fighting against Caesar in the name of Pompey, Ligarius was banished from Italy. Cicero was eventually able to convince Caesar to allow Ligarius to return, but Ligarius never got over it. Plutarch reports that rather than being grateful for his pardon, Ligarius was offended by the power which had put his life in jeopardy. He was a great friend of Brutus and considered himself an enemy of Caesar. Sadly, history does not record what became of Quintus Ligarius. Menochosa served under Caesar in Gaul and was charged with crushing the forces of the rebel Ambiorix. Long story short, Ambiorix got away and Menochosa himself wound up getting attacked. Caesar considered the loss an embarrassment. Menochosa participated in the Caesar party and is most notable for being the guy who missed Caesar and accidentally cut a fellow conspirator named Rubius. According to Appian, Menochosa was taken out by his slaves, some of whom he was mutilating by way of punishment. All of the conspirators hated Caesar, clearly, but one man, Aquila, really hated Caesar. One time, when Caesar was receiving a public honor, Aquila refused to rise for him. Caesar, in one of the earliest recorded acts of trolling, spent the next few days refusing to make promises to anyone without adding, "That is, if Pontius Aquila will allow me." It was infuriating to Aquila, but you've got to admit that it is kind of funny, in a very ancient Roman way. After Caesar was taken out, Aquila became one of Antony's lieutenants and is recorded as having been killed in a battle by Aulus Hirtius' forces during the siege of Mutina. Yet another inauspicious ending for one of the conspirators who helped take out the great and mighty Julius Caesar. So what do you think? Did the conspirators get what they deserved, or should history judge them as heroes? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our Weird History.